So the association itself has got a history of about 30 plus years now and has grown from companies who are focused on the pipelines part of the water sector all the way through to now we have data analysts, people who are specialists with things like machine logging, AI systems, the pipelines people, leakage specialists, consultants, contractors, some water companies are members. And the association itself is focused on driving change in the sector. It's committed to the water and sanitation for all agenda. We want to see a connected, skilled, innovative workforce, and we're looking at driving that ourselves through various programs from our own innovation program around water dragons. We've got a version aimed at schools with young water dragons. We're looking at systems thinking, we're looking at pipeline network assessment, we're looking at innovation and various other things within the association.
And we have a big focus on skills, so we've been closely associated with Engineering UK and the Big Bang Fair, and we were able to organise a large presence for the water sector that was supported by Anglian Water, which was very exciting, which we call Future Water Zone. So really trying to get into the heads of the young people out there that there's some great careers to be had in the water sector.
I think there's a combination of things. It's difficult to see the overall picture of innovation in the sector and where it sits at the utility level versus the supply chain level. In terms of the supply chain, we're looking to break down as many barriers as possible to be a catalyst for change in this programme. So we're looking to expose the innovations, to get the supply chain in a lot more discussion and engagement with the water utilities so that both sides of the coin, as it were, understand each other much better. We're setting up innovation training programs, innovation taster sessions. We run our own Water Dragons session, as I mentioned, which aimed at the young people as well. And so we're just trying to break down the barriers to adoption. There's a lot of innovation and new ideas coming up all the time, not just in water but across other sectors that's very applicable. And we just want to see what we can do to help increase the adoption rate for a lot of those ideas. It's all part of having a much better, more innovative and creative sector going forward.
I think it's also worth adding that most innovations happen in collaboration. So you very rarely find one technology emerging on its own. It always has to be supported by others, and we are working actively to help organisations collaborate and bring solutions forward using a combination of technologies.
The association has committed itself to supporting the UN Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is clean water and sanitation for all. And underneath that, as I've mentioned, we see it an essential element being a connected, innovative and skilled workforce. Because fundamentally at the end of the day, people are the drivers, and we talk about companies collectively, but actually it's people who do things, people who lead that change. And that's where we come in at the supply chain level. We recognise that the supply chain delivers probably 70%, if not more, of the outcomes that the water companies have to commit to. And that supply chain is full of lots of creative ideas, lots of exciting people. And we see a key element therefore being having a sector that everybody wants to work for. You know, people have heard me say this numerous times, but we should be more interesting than NASA and sectors like that, you know, because it's fundamentally we're more important.
And certainly water is a cross-cutting theme against absolutely everything that happens in the world, whether you're relying on it to survive in terms of eat, food, drink and washing, but also in terms of businesses operating, new technologies. If you look at the sort of water footprint of products, we are definitely in deficit in the UK. Even though we think we're good on water, we rely on other countries using their water to make the products that we value. And I think it's putting a spotlight on that. The other thing I'd just like to pick up again on the skills piece is that it's almost like an elephant in the room. We keep talking about innovation and we talk about people in the sector. We know that there are huge skill shortages looming for the sector, and also technology is moving so quickly that we have got to get into the young people's minds to make them realise it's an exciting future for water, and they can bring some of their skills and knowledge that we might otherwise lose to other sectors to come and help develop out the water challenges that we face.
Yeah, they're actually part of the transformation. Water's going through transformation, and that next generation is going to be critical to this. I think the challenges of people looking at the water sector as being interesting and attractive is that it's almost like a hidden relative. I thought somebody once quoted to me that so much of the asset base is underground, so much of what happens is away from where people can see it, that most people, certainly in the UK, just turn on the tap and get water. They have a shower or a bath, they flush a toilet, and that's as much interaction as they have. Perhaps once a year they get a water bill, or once every month in some cases, and not much else happens unless they are without water or they experience some sort of flooding. So I think we're back to the way the perception of the sector. As Alistair said, it's so fundamental and so critical that we need to be talking, particularly at the school level, about what's happening in the sector, all the exciting opportunities, and the fact that people can work in something that not only can they transform, but it's critical to how we manage the environment overall. And that will start breaking down some of the key problems where people don't know what's happening in the sector.
So the first challenge really is most people have no idea of the engineering and the technology that goes behind getting clean water to the tap and taking away and keeping our environment clean. So the first thing to do is make that more visible. That has to be through better schools programs. From what we see, water companies do engage with schools, but they tend to be when they're very young. The actual engagement at the time when they're making their subject choices and career choices between about 9 and 14, not so visible then. And actually, young people, when they come to the Future Water Zone at Big Bang, are completely amazed at the technologies that we're using going forward, which are actually up there with the space program in terms of the way we manage data,
and the
particularly
science
the digital
as
world.
well behind it all.
Science behind it, and of course you've got the extra dimension of actually doing something good for the community, because I think that really matters to young people with climate change looming, saving the planet using that sort of broad term. Young people through water can actually help to achieve that objective and also use their skills to meet the challenges that we face.
And I think it's the fact that young people are interested in things that make a difference, and they will be interested in the water sector because of the environmental issues, more so than the water sector because of the engineering and science, maths, etc. behind it. And actually the two fit neatly together, and it's creating the message that speaks to them in those terms. I think as well, young people are exciting and want to grow quickly and do a lot more. So we're going to enter a realm where the idea of somebody working for a water company or a supply chain company for 25 years will not be the norm in the future. It will be 3 or 4 years at a time. And that's what I think that certainly at the utility level they need to understand a lot more of, and therefore creating a much wider engagement programme is essential to keep capturing that wider knowledge. What can we learn from them? Well, Alice has mentioned we get engaged with Engineering UK. We've been at the Big Bang Fair this year for the first time ever with a water zone. But when we interview the schools, when we give out our Young Water Dragons Award, their thinking is just amazing. They've not got a history of bias. They think the unthinkable. They're not afraid to throw new ideas out and challenge existing preconceptions. And I think that framework and that approach is exactly what we can learn from them. They can make us feel excited and young again.
So ironically, young people really know how to be connected. They know how to use the technology that we have to be able to collaborate, and they don't think in silos, whereas our industries and our society is still very, very siloed, which is one of the reasons why trying to meet the challenges of the future, embracing new urban development, new ways of living, people wanting to live in different type of communities, that relies on far more collaboration and interconnectivity. Young people have those skills, and I think sometimes we don't recognise that when we're recruiting for the future, because those are the things that might inspire them to come and join the sector.
And it's recruiting for the future that's important, not necessarily for the jobs you have at this precise moment in time, but what is that future going to be like and what should it be like? So we do as an association understand that regulation's got a role to play in ensuring the sector fulfills its objectives, certainly at the utility level, and that the water companies are there for delivering water and sanitation and providing that to people throughout the community. We recognise that. But I think in terms of regulation, I think there could be a bigger push around innovation, perhaps a bigger push around skills. We've mentioned it a few times. I think the idea of having outcomes that define a skills agenda across the utilities would be great. I think regulators that ask more questions around innovation, that has to be positive. And regulators that themselves collaborate, so that actually it's great to push the water sector to do a huge number of things, but actually fundamental to some of what the water industry needs to deliver is relying on a very strong IT sector. And at the moment the IT sector is letting parts of the industry down. So I think the regulators there could talk a lot more to each other to say, let's get telecoms and IT up to speed, and that will help the water industry to start to deliver more on its own agenda and its own agility. And the more collaboration at the regulatory level there is, the more, as Alice has mentioned, we have this connected approach. So what's popular at the moment, and it shouldn't be popular because it's fundamental to engineering, is a systems approach. And I think that systems framework, that systems thinking is key to what we do going forward along with skills. And I think the regulators can help drive that in a way that the sector alone would struggle to do.
I think the first thing the regulator can do easily is to provide that leadership, and leadership through wider knowledge of how the sector operates, but also knowing how society is changing. So Paul's, as you just mentioned, the collaboration between the regulators. We need to recognise that our urban centres are going to change dramatically over the next 20 to 30 years, so we can't just regulate water, power, gas separately. They need to be done in an integrated way. Maybe even regulation, in inverted commas, for the way we develop our towns and cities, rather than relying on the current system, which is local authorities and planners and people such as developers prepared to spend the money. We probably need more leadership at a government level through better regulation, which is more interconnected regulation, I think, because a lot of the challenges that we face, which are water shortages, increasing populations and mobility problems because of population growth, can only be done in collaboration, not by regulating in silos.
I like the approach in Ofwat's emerging strategy. I like the fact they're looking at broader objectives for the sector as a whole, and that they're trying to drive an agenda as to what that means, and what that means not just at the company level, but at the environmental level, the social level. There's a lot more discussion around social contracts. That is really positive and welcome, because I think these are debates that need to happen away from just the fundamentals of delivering the service. What's missing, possibly for me, the fact that I run an association, the voice of the supply chain seemed to be missing from the strategy itself. I think some of the views of the supply chain when we've had our regular meetings with Ofwat have been reflected, but perhaps a more obvious voice for the supply chain, which may not be part of the remit for the regulator, but actually, given what the supply chain delivers in the sector, I think that voice, I appreciate it's diverse, perhaps needs to be louder. Maybe that's incumbent on us, maybe that's incumbent on the regulator, or combination of the two. But there's loads of views in the supply chain, and having them better reflected would be good.
I think Ofwat's shift towards outcomes was absolutely the right thing to do. Seeing water industry not as a custodian of assets, but the provider of great water, and obviously you mentioned earlier health and well-being as well. It's all part of that, great water supplies. I think the only thing that's probably missing is probably more impetus to providing common ways of testing technologies to bring them online, because behind the sector that we see now, every single water company insists on retesting absolutely every product. It's not beyond the wit of man to think that that could all be done centrally, and I think Ofwat could lead on that, if not financially, but certainly encouraging the sector itself to try and create a common approach to testing and implementing solutions.
And maybe following up from that, maybe recognising some of the initiatives that are beginning to emerge out there with some of the supply chain members that we know, so that a product's looked at and tested and approved, and everybody recognises that process.
It is one of the biggest blockers to bringing new innovation online. The number of technologies that have stalled, or we've lost them to overseas because we don't see them, because the testing regime and the bringing online is just so expensive for suppliers to do over and over again. It's not economic.
I think because we're now in an outcome-driven world, that collaboration is, well, I would say sort of fundamental. So if you brought a lot of people together in a room at the start and said, well, here are the 10 outcomes we've committed to delivering as a water company, or the X number of outcomes we've agreed to deliver as a sector, what's possible? And you have that from everything from contractors, suppliers, the tier 2s, 3s, 4s in the room, as well as all the tier 1s, and you start to gain a collective thought process around this. We've got the Young Water Dragons initiative as well, bringing some of the school children, so that actually you're thinking in a different way, and recognising that maybe the answer you come up with isn't necessarily the right answer in 3 or 4 years' time. So that's where collaboration sits in. It's not just about bringing people together, it's about what's delivered on the basis of that. Where's that collective views coming from?
I think it's also collaboration not only within the supply chain, but actually with the local governments, with the local communities, with large businesses, being a bit more ambitious perhaps about collaborating. Clearly behind collaboration there are all sorts of contractual issues that, we're not saying that's easy, but if we could have a world where we live in where that's the first thing we're going to do is collaborate, and then all the contractual stuff just mops up behind, then that's where we should be led. Very often it's the contracts that lead and everything stalls.
So this is, back to something you mentioned about what the regulator can do. Perhaps there could be a push to having a better discussion around procurement. So more innovation in procurement, more collaboration, more understanding of things. So we don't just buy a product that supports a particular outcome. The industry is not afraid to look at all sorts of models, lease models, other forms of purchase models, so that it helps drive a more sort of, as Alistair said, a more ambitious way of looking at everything from collaboration, engagement, different ideas. Yes, I do. I mean, there's some great examples out there. You look at the likes of Trainline and compare the markets and all these. They're using data to help people make a decision on everything from buying trains, insurance, mobile phone contracts, etc. The data's driving the decision-making process. So absolutely, I think the challenge at the moment is around how much data's collected that's maybe not used, and what data's collected that perhaps isn't necessarily useful. So more data, if it helps drive the way that the industry runs itself, is more agile, is much more responsive to things that are happening, gets ahead of the game, be that prediction or be that other ways that we're looking at the data. That's got to be good. But it can't be collecting data for the sake of it. It must be driving things that are happening in the sector and driving the digital transformation process that's beginning to happen.
And again, going back to collaboration, let's collaborate with communities, citizen science approaches to finding out how assets are operating. Very often people in local communities will have a good idea where a leak might be coming from or where wire flooding keeps occurring, and yet they're very often not consulted. So we've got to have much better ways of to use the Ofwat term, tapping in to customers and citizen science data that's out there, and being more agile in the way that we use that and then make decisions on the back of it.
Yeah, the supply chain is active in a number of areas. So everything from how do you apply material science, what could that start to mean in terms of pipe rehabilitation, pipeline relining, what can the sector start to do around how it looks at data we just mentioned, the work that's taking place, obviously with the leakage challenges, is leading to a lot more information being generated, and that drives different decisions going forward. And those decisions can be everything from smart meters through to different types of technology, through to not just using leak noise loggers or flow meters, but you actually have other things on those systems, so you'll start doing multi-parameter analysis. There's some great work around both artificial intelligence and VR systems that are used from everything through to managing the networks to training people. Some of those systems, the way they get people up to speed in the knowledge base they need is great, and it's moved on leaps and bounds. It's changed health and safety. And there's different companies out there looking at battery technology, for example, which is perhaps less used at the moment in the water sector, but has a potentially significant role to play in terms of local energy storage. And where the idea is that, so if we look at things like cybersecurity, the industry is beginning to pick up a lot of the work that's been done across the other sectors with the likes of Airbus and other big organisations, and I think that's fascinating. And the work that's been done with the likes of Rolls-Royce on airplane engines, they map all the data so well that as a plane lands, if it needs anything happening to it, somebody's there with the relevant part or equipment. And the water industry is beginning to look at that and what that means, and how you get that latest information together to drive that process. So there's some great skills happening out there, and some very ambitious things with the companies.
That's one of the things that's been exciting about our Water Dragons competition, which is run along the same lines as Dragons Den, and we see the vast variety of innovations we see, from communications technologies through to something as simple as a better way to be able to access difficult assets over water. So one of our winners, Pontoon Works, come up with a fantastic way of actually being able to work on top of an activated flow bed, and with still able to support, walk on, access all the equipment overhead, where normally you had to drain the tank down and put in extensive scaffolding. So very exciting. And the other thing that we've seen recently and been excited by is at the Manufacturing Technology Centre, the MTC Centre in Coventry, who've got a real focus on additive technologies and 3D printing, and printing whole railheads on railway lines. So why can we not be 3D printing pipelines? I mean, that's how we've got to be thinking in the future. We could eliminate joints, for instance, if we could make pipelines using 3D printing technologies. And one of our winners from a few years ago 3D prints valves, don't they? Using, and again, that's a technology that we want to see taken forward.
I might have so I might have two, if I may. One would be a mechanism for driving the adoption of innovation. So, and I must sort of clarify that by saying innovation is not just blue sky thinking. People think it's the disruptive thing. It's not. The example we just referred to is all about incremental innovation, and that's got a huge role to play in just changing the way that we do things. That's fundamental. So what could that mechanism be? It could be everything from having to make reports innovation, having an innovation fund, having innovation incubators, centres. There needs to be something that drives that process of innovation. The second one is straightforward, given all the skills that we've mentioned. That, for me, you talk about water throughout the national curriculum. And so we end up not just driving interest, not just driving education and knowledge, but it's into the very people that think differently, that have the minds to think beyond what we think. They think of that future. We tend to look at where we are now and project forward because we've got the information, we can do the averages, we can do all the maths. But actually, the brave thing is to say, that's the future that we want, how do we get there? And that's where I think the national curriculum teaching all the school children comes in, because they will think that way.
And if I had to sort of build on that, my vision would be a world where every drop of water is valued and used, that our urban development has water as a key component of those decisions, so that we no longer keep building houses the way we do, with all the pipelines coming in, taps and all the water falling on the roof and going into drains. Why should we not have a society where every building captures every drop and that water is treated and supplied within the home, and almost eliminate this network of pipelines we've got everywhere? We've got to start thinking visionary. And funnily enough, that's exactly the sort of thing that comes out from some of the young people that take part in Young Water Dragons. That's how visionary they are. We all stand back and laugh and think, oh, that can't happen. Of course it can happen. We have the technologies already to be able to treat water in the home. It's only politics and society at the moment that stops that happening, because it's so locked into its own siloed thinking.
Yeah, maybe we'll reach the point where a barrel of water is valued much higher than a barrel of oil.